welcome. Thank you for joining us, wherever you are, for Curating Happiness. I'm Teresa Cisneros, your facilitator today. My pronouns are she, her, and to give a brief audio description myself, I am a female with large black glasses and black hair. And I'm wearing a black blouse with plants in the background and some colorful post-it notes on one side of my screen. For those not familiar with Wellcome Collection, we are a free museum and library in London that explores health and being human, making connections across science, medicine, life, and art. Today's event, we will be speaking with Laurie, Britton, Newell, and George Vasey to discuss the making and remaking of Joy and Tranquillity. The order will be, we will be in conversation. First we will be showing a short film, then we will be in conversation, and then we will be able to open up the conversation for audience questions. A little bit of housekeeping first. Before we get started, I'm going to briefly run through how we will run the event, which I've just done. We will be taking questions, and you can watch this live on YouTube on our channel. If you could please keep your cameras and microphones off, hopefully you can see us and hear us clearly. We have live speech to text provided by Stage Text. You can access captions via the link shared in the chat box now, and they'll open up in a separate window. This event is British Sign Language interpreted. Our interpreters, Michelle and Russell, will take it in turns to interpret what is discussed into BSL. We'll be audio describing this event. The host and speakers will describe themselves and key visual elements they referred to. The event is an hour long. We're going to show you a film, as I said, which is about 7 minutes, and then we will be joined in conversation with the curators, followed by open questions. This is an interactive event. We'd love to hear from you throughout. You can chat, comment, and ask questions for the Q&A in the YouTube chat. You do need to be signed into YouTube to chat there. You can also ask questions and comments without signing in via Slido. We can't be together in the same room right now, but we can be together here. So why not just give us a shout out now and tell us where you are in the world? We love to know where you're coming from. Safe online space. Of course, this afternoon, we want everyone to have a positive experience, and we want to create a safe space for people to share their ideas. So please enjoy the chat function. Enjoy the chat function responsibly and respectfully. For more on this, please see the messages from our moderator team in the chat and in the event description. If you are struggling with the platform or have a question, please comment in the chat box or Slido, and our Wellcome Collection moderators will get in touch. Now, thank you for listening to that. I'd like to now welcome our two curators. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Laurie, Brighton, Newell. Laurie is a senior curator at Wellcome Collection and co-curator of the Joy and Tranquillity exhibitions, part of the season on happiness. And she curated the exhibition somewhere in 2018. She previously ran a rural curatorial platform in the USA and taught at the University of Colorado. Prior to that, she worked as a curator at the V&A Museum, where she curated critically acclaimed exhibitions such as Memory of Place and Make Lab, as well as One-to-One Architects Build Small Spaces in 2010. And Out of the Ordinary, A Spectacular Craft. She writes about contemporary creative practice for books, magazine, and newspapers. And I will also read to you a little bit about George Vasey. George Vasey is curator currently working on projects with Wellcome Collection and Leeds Art Gallery. He has curated over 50 exhibitions since 2008 in public, academic, and commercial contexts. He has previously worked as a curator at the Northern Gallery for Contemporary Art, Sunderland, and as a curatorial fellow at Newcastle University. In 2017, he co-curated the Turner Prize. His writing has been published in Art Monthly, Art Review, Burlington Contemporary, Frieze, and Moose magazines, as well as numerous artist catalogs and books. He regularly teaches and has mentored artists, writers, and curators for various organizations. So welcome, George and Laurie. If you'd like to just introduce yourselves and describe yourselves, please, for our audiences.
Thanks, Teresa. I'll jump in. So I'm Laurie, and my pronouns are she, her. I have brown, wavy hair, blue eyes, and white freckly skin. And I'm wearing a navy top, and I'm in a really unjoyful room. I'm very grey, kind of neutral space at the Wellcome Trust, but lovely to be here.
I'm George. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a white male, aged 40. I have short brown hair. I'm wearing glasses with a white shirt and blue jumper. And similarly, I'm in a neutral space that's particularly joyous. So we'll try and create a bit more joy in the talk.
All right.
So yeah, I'm just going to briefly overview the season at Wellcome Collection to give everybody a little bit of context to frame our conversation today. And then I think we're going to show you some film walkthroughs of both galleries. So On Happiness is a season of exhibitions, events, online programming, offsite installations that really sets out to kind of rethink how we feel good. Me and George have really tried to look at ways of expanding even further this exceptionally elusive and difficult subject of happiness. So everything from kind of awe, if you like, an A to Z, of awe to zest, and all of the kind of considering lots of different ways in which these emotions sit under this vast term, and also recognizing that the happiness as a term is not neutral. It's a complicated and quite burdensome term when it's left as it is. So we've looked at lots of different ways to try and engage with this subject at this difficult time. And so at the heart of the season are these two exhibitions, Joy and Tranquillity. And I think we're going to play you a little walkthrough now of those shows.
This is the atrium space at Wellcome Collection. The first artwork you're greeted by is Updating Happiness, a floor-to-ceiling projection screen presenting vividly colourful quotes on personal happiness by data designer Stephanie Posavec. We move past the spiral staircase and are greeted by colourful banners in blues, greens, yellows and pinks that signal the entrance to the first exhibition in the season, Tranquillity. Moving towards the glass entrance doors, we move underneath the title graphics from above that spell out Tranquillity. On entering the exhibition space, you are met by a white floor-to-ceiling paper-hanging text panel and a drop in light levels and temperature, framed by translucent matte white walls made of silicone. Lights from the next space glow through from the other side of the wall. As you move forward into Jasleen Kaur's installation, My Body is a Temple of Gloom, an oversized glowing purple crystal lamp beckons you in the centre of the room. And as you look round the space, you see three films projected on the translucent fabric, with bodies performing strange yoga poses. The films are interspersed with strong blocks of colour and words such as colonization and breathe into the pain. A large backdrop of the holy site of Rishikesh covers one wall. We are now moving into the central space of the gallery, into a section called Balancing Act. Pools of light mark out a series of objects in cases mounted on the walls. Several of Wellcome Collection's most precious historic objects are on display here, some dating back to 1390. As well as other works by contemporary artists, such as this wall of carefully darned sports socks by the artist Celia Pym. The layout is spacious, encouraging you to move slowly and take your time with the work. This is a wall of 6 colour photographs, each about a metre wide, by the photographer Toby Glanville, capturing intergenerational community on their allotment in East London. Orange fabric benches are interspersed throughout the space, each one accompanied by an audio quote from a different thinker. We are now at the threshold of Crystal Labasse's installation regarding forests, and the soundscape changed to the sounds of the forest. As you walk towards a large photograph which seems to have been taken at the edge of a forest. At this point you begin to notice a strong scent that smells like soil after it's rained. And as you turn the corridor, you become fully enveloped by the dark space, surrounded by a whole room of these luminous landscapes, which look like light boxes glowing in the twilight. There are 30 of these photographs, and each are about 3 meters wide. Each photograph contains a rich variety of greens, blues and browns, the knotted barks of trunks and the roots of trees, and the lush greens of ferns and foliage on the forest floor. Moving through the trees, you pick up different sounds, such as deers calling each other and the noise of wind and water. Green fabric chairs and stools are carefully placed and lit, and encourage you to sit and be still amongst these ancient trees.
As you come into the Joy exhibition, you enter a corridor-like space. The word Joy is displayed in a hand-drawn orange typeface. The walls reveal timber painted in vertical and horizontal lines in vibrant colours. As you turn left, the walls are painted in bright yellow, the colour of happiness. Photographs of dancers are fixed to the floor and walls of the gallery, and you are greeted with a picture of someone dancing upside down. There are 4 flat-screen TVs displayed vertically, forming an intimate circle with a dancer on each screen. The dancers, all people of colour, are also projected onto the wall on the left-hand side, bringing their individual movements together in a collective dance. Everything is tinted yellow, and the dancers are wearing yellow. Each dancer is acting a different movement in response to a score, and the movement switches between sensuous, frenetic and trance-like choreography. The work feels both playful and joyful. The main part of the gallery is called Joy and Others and brings together historic objects drawn from our own collection, contemporary artworks including a film of the artist Harold Offey grimacing, a photograph of a man jumping into a swimming pool on holiday, and etchings of people dancing, as well as paintings and drawings all displayed on protruding walls.
Smile even though it's breaking.
We can see a photograph of a man dressed as Spider-Man entertaining children in Stockport during lockdown, alongside a periodic table of emotion displaying a multiplicity of emotions. Walking through the gallery, we see a large figurative painting of 2 adults with a child who are all smiling. At the end of the gallery are works that depict the Holi festival, the Hindu celebration of spring, as well as a drawing of a public square, drawn in black and white, depicting an imagined community of people. To the right is a photograph of a protest against the Vietnam War, with people holding hands to form a smiley face. Snaking around the gallery are placards leaning against the wall. They're pasted with bunting in different colours to form a line that suggests a street party. On the left-hand side is a TV documenting a performance with the placards that happened outside of the gallery. We move through some doors, and the wall in the foyer is multicoloured. The bold use of pink, orange and blue creates a joyful collage of alternative happiness memes in different sizes that are drawn from public responses. They say things like happiness begins with mowing the lawn and meditation brings happiness.
This is Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Hope you enjoyed the film and the walkthrough. So what we will now be doing is I'm going to be speaking to Laurie and George, asking a few questions about exploring the exhibition and how they got here, but also in terms of the making of it and how they had to consider a rethinking, because we weren't expecting, of course, to have COVID in the middle of as we were trying to put this exhibition up at the Welcome. So I think I'd like to start with Laurie, if that's okay. So Laurie, what was the impetus for this project? Why this topic? As I understand, it has been in development for a few years now. And how did George fit into it as you were developing? So thinking about how you move as a lead curator, then you share the curatorial thinking and the process with George, and then maybe we can have George add a couple of lines, some of their experience coming into the project.
Certainly, yeah. So as you said, we have been working on this project for several years. I think thinking back, the original sort of impetus or provocation for the idea to approach the subject of happiness came from an audience survey, I think from early 2018 actually, where we were receiving different data back from audience that seemed to suggest that we weren't engaging our public emotionally, and that we weren't doing as well as our peers or other museums in this area. And that struck me as a really kind of interesting provocation, given that Wellcome Collection is quite famous for addressing subjects such as death and sex, quite emotive subjects. So this was a kind of an interesting provocation to me. So it's sort of an idea to think about, could we do an exhibition or a series of exhibitions that really just focused on emotion? And then I think when we kind of started to consider, okay, but what emotion? It was at a time where lots of research and findings were coming out about well-being. I guess at that point I didn't necessarily even really know what well-being was. I think at that point I kind of became aware that that's often a term that's used by perhaps scientific or kind of the political economic community instead of the word happiness. I've become kind of drawn to this idea of what well-being was, and a kind of conversation around positive emotion. I guess also being connected and affiliated to a scientific organisation such as Wellcome Trust, I found that very interesting that there is lots of medical research into equally subjective emotions such as anxiety and stress, but less kind of research into positive emotions. So it was kind of, again, another interest in exploring that as a topic. But boy did we meet our match with a giant subject. So to sort of roll in, so George joined the project about a year in, which was wonderful. And maybe George, I mean, I know what you brought to the project, and I can go into that. But maybe you want to say at that point where you found us in this kind of pickle of many rabbit holes of the largest subject, mankind has wrestled with this topic for centuries. So you found us in a bit of a state, I think, when you joined.
Yeah, I think I came into the project in spring 2019, and there'd been a huge amount of research that yourself and Elizabeth had done. I remember sort of speaking to you and thinking, God, how do you approach a show like happiness? I mean, it's such a vast topic. And I guess I was the fresh pair of eyes on the research. So I guess my first job was to come in and act as a bit of an editor. And I remember asking you a question, what had been the most interesting thing that you'd learned through the process? And I think you were talking about, learning about the microbiome and the relationship between how the stomach communicates to the brain, and that serotonin is actually produced in the stomach as much as the brain. And that had been really surprising to you. And that felt really crucial to sort of focus on, what was really exciting to us through that research, and try to impart that onto the visitor. And something we talk a lot about is that we're not experts as curators, but we find the experts, and it's our job to make sense of them and to try and tell a story. And what that also felt very crucial to me is that to insert our kind of subjectivity on this topic, because it is so vast, and it is not a survey of happiness at all. It's very much our kind of personal journey through this topic. But also to quickly define the terms, it's not a show about happiness as such. It was a show, very quickly we knew we couldn't define that term. No one else has managed to do it. So we were going to really struggle to do that as well. So it's really to focus on the role of positive emotion. And that's a slightly different question, I think. So the show is really trying to find how people have attempted to feel good, and what emotion is, where does it come from, what's its role on the body and mental health. And so that's kind of where I came into it. And it's changed quite a lot over the last couple of years, as Teresa was saying, with COVID as well.
That. This leads quite well into my next question, which is, because it is such a complex topic, right? We hear the word happiness and this kind of aspirational space of being, and as you said, there are many other ways to think of and through happiness. Other different emotions, everything from satisfaction to joy to tranquility to peace to variety of them. So I was thinking about both the challenge of kind of going, okay, what do we focus on? And also that you must have had some fun doing it too, right? Like, let's not forget about fun. And you get to decide what we're going to be experiencing, but also in relation to what COVID did, right? We had this something kind of come in the middle of your thinking and making and doing, and you had to reconsider also, I think, about people who were going to see this exhibition. Many of us have experienced lots of sadness over the last year, lots of isolation, lots of loneliness. So I guess my question is really around the considerations you were thinking about the visitor in relation to putting on a show that's called a season on happiness, and might that make people go, oh, I really want to escape into this, or might it go, oh, that's really insensitive? So I think it's more about, to both of you, how do you sit with this and work through it and think through it?
I mean, I don't mind jumping in, George. And I think so. Just to kind of explain, we had the shows ready to go for last May. So we had a version of the exhibitions that was pretty close to being done and ready to open when lockdown hit in the UK in March. I think at that point it's fair to say when you really get stuck into kind of happiness research, just to kind of really distill and oversimplify, of course, but you can kind of put research into two camps. One is a kind of an idea about happiness that's connected to ideas of the good life, that has a kind of morality or a religious perspectives into what it means to live a life well lived, a worthwhile life. And then there is a kind of the camp of feeling good, and definitely where we've ended up now with the shows is very much more in rethinking how we feel good camp. But I think the shows we had ready to go before were actually more kind of across sort of happyology. I think that's a term George kind of coined. We'd kind of tried to think about the history of how people had approached the subject of happiness, and kind of give a different kind of cultural interpretations of that, and kind of tried to bring together quite a whimsical kind of reflective survey through a kind of happyology, if you like. And I think pandemic hits and we had to stop for a bit. Like, there was no way we could actually engage with that topic for a few months. I think we just downed tools for a little bit, stopped for a while, and it wasn't really until last summer, I think, that we could re-engage with thinking about how we might reframe it. And I think that one of the questions that had been in the mix throughout, but that just kind of came to the fore, and we kind of articulated lots of the content around that subject, around that key question, which I think is like, in moments of difficulty, in moments of adversity, how have individuals and communities sort of sought moments of joy? Like, in what way can joy be a way to cope with adversity, as kind of see you through the dark times kind of question? And maybe George, you want to jump in on that, the kind of rethinking and what we did to change the shows to try and make them right for now.
Yeah, I mean, all of the commissions were in place and initiated before COVID. I remember last summer looking at the material and where we were, because we'd really stopped the show really in the final stages of the production in spring 2020. And as Laurie said, we just had to take a step back from it. I remember just looking through it, and we said to each other that we took quite a lot of material out of the show, and we really focused on objects that made us smile, and created what we hope was a kind of an emotional resonance with visitors. It's a show about happiness, which should make people feel happy, but also try to challenge what that means as a concept as well. So we were thinking very much about creating a kind of multi-sensory exhibition that wasn't just about image, it was like sound and smell and sound and moving image as well. But I think it's interesting in the sense that COVID hasn't necessarily brought much new to the project. What it's done is sort of amplify a lot of our original questions. I think a lot of that sense of what brings us pleasure and makes us happy feels more urgent. And at times of difficulty. And as Laurie was saying, that original question of how does joy help us navigate moments of adversity is hugely important, and the difficulty and pain that a lot of people are going through at the moment. So there's been a few objects that have come into the show really since last summer, but the vast majority of it has just been kind of re-narrativized to make it feel make it feel more urgent. I think a lot of people in the first couple of days have talked about how it feels so prescient in relation to COVID, what people have done during lockdown to alleviate stress and uncertainty. And I think what's been great in a lot of ways, that COVID has been terrible, but communities have come together, through acts of altruism and collaboration and community. And those are themes that I think are addressed in the show, as are issues around resilience and catharsis. They're kind of words that we kept on returning to in our research.
Thank you both for that. I guess this also leads my kind of to another question, which is really thinking about the diversity of perspectives and what you're platforming. And it's in relation to and in consideration to the recent last year's global anti-racism protest. So there are these kind of there is the question of course, of COVID, the pandemic and the effects, but then there's other things in the background that we're also looking at as a society, everything from climate change, of course, to the anti-racism global protests. Just wondering, did this in any way influence some of your thinking, who you might commission, some of the questions you might surface, because there is a very clear piece on protest, right, that you actually platformed, and then you do have Jaslene's piece, which is exploring cultural appropriation I think, and yoga and practices, and then you do have also Harold Ofe, who is very much involved, or platforms different forms of bodies who are not just what we usually see, which are white non-disabled bodies. So it's interesting that we have, I think, more of a kind of diverse perspective, and I think this is one of the first times that I've seen this at a place like Welcome. And is this something you're thinking much more along the lines for the future too? So I guess maybe the question is how did sort of global, concerns affect what you decided to explore through the commissioning of the artists and some of the works you included?
Should I start on that one, Laurie, and you come in?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, all the commissions were in place before COVID and before last year, but it's really interesting how, the context has changed around the commissions. I mean, Howard Offe's commission that explores the idea of healing and dance and catharsis. He was really interested in how historical and societal traumas had often led to kind of moments of you like not only change but also spaces of euphoria. So we can think of the after the war and the production of the welfare state, but also the carnivals and festivals, the spaces where people can kind of release themselves to have this kind of euphoric release. And he became really interested in medieval dancing manias and this sort of relationship between pain and joy. And his commission, which I'm still coming to terms with, but I think it encapsulates so many of the emotions that people have felt in that last year. It's at points confrontational. It's at points quite sensuous. It's it's uncomfortable, and at other moments it feels like these dancers are kind of releasing this kind of pain within their own bodies. And it's interesting. I think of the work that came into the show after the summer that sort of responds in part to some of our conversations was actually Octavia E. Butler, the American science fiction writer. And her work is, sort of set in the near future and is immensely prescient in relation to a lot of current debates and foregrounding and really centering minoritized communities. And she's created throughout her whole life, she made these kind of notes to herself that were kind of affirmative. And when she was living in poverty and not having the success that she deserved, she wrote these kind of notes about how successful she would be. And I guess I was just wanting to say that I think what an exhibition can do as an act of protest is to imagine a better future. It's a kind of contesting of the historical, and that we're all contributing to and kind of collectively trying to come to terms with, but really about imagining a space of possibility. And I think that's what Octavia Butler's work shares with a lot of the artists in the show, like Amalia Pica. And Laurie, I don't know if you want to come in and talk about Jasline's work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so Jasleen Kaur's installation, as you kind of got a little glimpse of in the walkthrough, is set up like a sort of mock yoga or wellness kind of retreat. And I think because obviously yoga is so important to many people as a kind of daily act of kind of centering themselves or feeling more balanced, but now of course it's quite removed, if in the most part, from its kind of spiritual and kind of cultural origins. I think it was really interesting the way in which Jasleen's taken us on that journey, both as curators but also now in the public sphere with audience. But I think this idea that the uncomfortableness that sits in, we can't practice self-care at the extent or in exploitation of others. And I think that is also been a really important kind of reflection for many. It's not a new question, it's a really old question, but it's something that I think has felt very, very come to the fore in this last year and a half. And I think that, as George said, a lot of these commissions were in process and nearly finished before pandemic, but just the context and the reframing of the narrative around that has just become even more kind of important. And I think, as you mentioned, Amalia Pica's piece upstairs. So Amalia's work historically has been really interested in looking at the interrelationship between protest and celebration, and the kind of point where those two meet. So actually, interestingly, I think, and we did think very carefully and talked a lot with Amalia as well during lockdown about the kind of the context of this notion of protest really coming explosively kind of to the front and center last year and I think thinking about the way in which her piece it's sort of talking about the act of coming together. It's not about a specific cause. It's not, and I think they very carefully thought about the soundtrack that went with that, the rhythm and beat. I think you've also heard a little bit on the audio there. It's not a specific protest. They had to find a kind of sound that wasn't affiliated with a very specific cause, but that it was more about that kind of communal act of coming together and the kind of hope and possibility that is inherent in that kind of motivation to take to the streets and try and challenge a status quo or break through something. And I think that's been really, really interesting. But actually the last voice that's in the exhibition, as we mentioned, we've interspersed different voices, but kind of from scientists and activists and different writers. The last voice in the exhibition is the voice of a writer and an activist called Joshua Asami, who's part of the Black Lives Matter movement, but he's got a really powerful kind of perspective on the nature of hope, integral within the act of protest.
It's great. Thank you both so much. It just kind of makes me think of, the human condition, but we do have an exhibition, being human. And then last year we had a series of programs on what it does mean to be human now. And it's quite interesting just how, the condition of being human at this point in time, what does it mean and how different it was 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, pre-pandemic, and this idea of the normal and the question of what returning to things. And I think I just keep going back to thinking about, our emotional state. Where are we? Where is our current, not just the mental health, but how do we experience it, and how could we get back to feeling some of the joy, that we're no longer going to be able to experience because we can no longer experience things in the same way we did 2 years ago. Well, this leads me to my next question, which is about what is the purpose of a museum now? Now that we've done these things and we've all experienced this kind of moment of reckoning to some extent about our humanity and coming together. So I guess it's an open question for George, for you, Laurie, but it's sort of, what do you kind of see what the point of a museum is, and also how it determines what you'd like to create for the visitor? What is that experience? And I know you're doing it right now through the objects you've talked about a bit, but I guess it's both a very open question about, as curators and as people who are actively creating a space to come together, to experience, to question, to learn from, etc. So, and then thinking about people's health in relation to these, well, the welcome kind of public-private space as well.
George?
Big questions, right? I think, I'm a staunch advocate for the museum as a kind of civic public space where people come together, as I said, to contest history. We're all in a process of, and this is a constant work in progress. It's not something that's arrived at and then it's finished. So, you know, as an exhibition curator, and I think Laurie, and something we've talked a lot about is that I said rather cheesily, this is a kind of love letter to exhibition making. You know, I want it to feel like it sort of imparts this kind of, it resonates with people and lots, you know, it's felt as much as thought. And I think that exhibitions and museums are very important places to tell stories and understand histories and increase a sense of belonging. Of course, they're not perfect, and a lot of people are excluded from those narratives. And that's the process that we have to interrogate and understand who's not part of that story. And of course, as I said originally, this isn't a survey of happiness. There's lots of things that aren't in this exhibition, but it's a position. It's what we've settled on at this particular moment in time. So I think museums can offer experiences for people to come together, but also be part of a collective point of retelling history and using our collections and trying to interrogate them. And I think this is absolutely necessary for society, for a healthy society, and a happy society as well. So I think that's what museums can do. Laurie, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think, and I'm not sure if that's a question that's come up already, but I think when George mentioned we re-edited some of the content, it was more of the kind of auxiliary material that was less objecty. It felt really important to reward people coming back into museums and physical space with some really exquisite and powerful encounters in 3 dimensions. You know, that power of being right next to an object that was written by Octavia. But you know, you're in the room with that, with a page from her diary. You're next to an object that dates back from 1390. It's a kind of well-being manual, or like a self-help book written for women in 1390, you know, and it's there and it's lit very carefully, but you have a one-on-one encounter with that object, and that's really, really, really important. That's been it kind of, I think, creating space for this idea. And I think this idea of unselfing is really important across both shows, which is something that I think the writer Iris Murdoch talks about, which is that in looking at a work of art, in encountering perhaps a kind of awe-inspiring landscape or kind of encounter that takes you out of yourself, allows you to sort of pause the kind of ruminative kind of difficult thoughts perhaps, and just be in the moment with this thing that you're encountering. This idea of unselfing, I think, is really important, and I do think that that's what museum and cultural spaces can do when they do it well. That's what they can do for people.
Thank you both. And I know some people are starting to ask questions. That's really great. But before we go there, and also just another reminder, please add any questions you might have, and we'll try to work our way through them after I ask my final question. So my final question really is how do you ensure that access to the exhibition goes beyond the walls of the museum itself? What approaches are you exploring? Who might be involved? Have you thought about, now that we're so much on screen, what a new experience might be about? What does it mean to be in an exhibition or in relation to an exhibition, and the kinds of themes that you're exploring about? You know, I think, this idea of it's taking you beyond yourself when you experience an exhibition. How could you recreate that in different ways? But I also like this thing that was mentioned about the exhibition as an act of protest. You know, how do you recreate some of this kind of feeling and being with something via other platforms, other ways? So if you can share any thoughts that you've had on that, but also what you might be doing over the Unhappiness season, that would be great.
Sure, I don't mind jumping in, George, you add to that. But yeah, so I think the season as a whole has a lot of different elements to it, a lot of online programs. So we have a kind of series of podcasts that start in later in August, which are looking both at the emotion of joy and tranquility, but kind of beyond that into, I think, hope and awe and lots of different subjects too. But integral, as mentioned, interspersed in the exhibition, but completely accessible sort of online, is this series of 24 different audio voices. So it really does go from a kind of Jitsunomiya and Tenzin Palmo, who's a Buddhist kind of nun, to, as I mentioned, kind of different writers and poets. The poet Raymond Antrobus reflecting on kind of joy and sorrow. So it's a kind of, there is this audio journey that sits beyond it and works, I think, really well, even without coming physically into the exhibition space. We are kind of going physically beyond the building. So the Crystal Labas installation has a kind of touring element to it. So we're looking at whether you can create a space of a kind of restorative and calming space in the midst of healthcare settings or busy working hospitals. So the first part of that tour is at Bart's Hospital, and that launches in early September. So whether you can create a kind of tranquil space for people, patients, staff, different people in the midst of this busy hospital. So we're kind of looking at ways in which we can reach beyond the building with programming. And that's definitely something that's come to the fore throughout lockdown, trying to working out how we navigate different platforms with our programming.
I'll just also quickly mention Stephanie Posavec's project Updating Happiness, which is both on site as a commission, but can be engaged with online on social media as well. So this is a kind of alternative happiness meme generator that people can kind of complete a questionnaire, and it generates a specific happiness meme for each participant, and that contributes to a growing archive that's on site. So really that is part of the show that feels like we're giving the final question over to the public and kind of trying to get a sense of what makes them happy, and that in a sense feels like the most important question right now. But yes, we've tried to engage kind of off-site, online and on-site locations.
Thank you both. So I'm going to do a mix of asking questions and also reading comments from our audiences who are watching from across the UK, South Africa and Bangladesh right now at this point. So first comment is, I really loved the tour films and I really felt like I was there, loved it. Question is, are there any objects or installations you had to leave out? What are they? And maybe why?
It's interesting. Putting on an exhibition is a kind of what you want and what's not available, what's possible. It's always a compromise between trying to get things from lenders and other institutions and budgets. But I mean, we took a lot of work out of the show, and some of that was fantastic material, but the kind of narrative changed, I think, last year. And we were very aware that about creating space around objects and not overloading, like people can only take on board so much. There was a lot of sort of 18th and 19th century material that looked at kind of when emotion, so the word emotion only started being used in the 19th century and marked a kind of shift in Europe from a kind of spiritual understanding of feeling to a secular understanding of feeling. So which was super interesting when I was doing my research, but there was a lot of material in our own collection that kind of dealt with this shift. And much of that we've left out of the show because I feel like we just refocus the narrative really. But there's always lovely things that you're unable to include, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and there was also quite a lot of material that looked at the way in which people have tried to capture, measure, and sort of prescribe, some of which from our collections and other historic collections as well, which really important, pertinent and valuable kind of content, but sadly that we need another show for that.
It's going to come in on that. The one thing we couldn't get hold of was the original smiley badge, which was created by a designer in the mid-60s for an insurance company. It has a very interesting history. I've become a bit of a geek about the history of the smiley face. That's just a very rare and was very difficult to get hold of.
Thanks for sharing that. So I'll go on to the next question. If you were to start the whole process again tomorrow, what would you do differently? Maybe we'll start with Laurie, since you did start it and then George joined. So what would you do differently?
I think maybe next it needs to be, melancholy. We'll do melancholy. Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said at the start, I definitely felt like, and like George, I've been working curating exhibitions for a really long time. I suspect this is probably somewhere around my 50th project. I think I really felt like I met my match with happiness. I mean, it's such a vast subject, and maybe we didn't answer this before, but there are moments at which working on it has been really difficult, really depressing. Like it's really hard to distinguish when you're talking about human emotion, to sort of maintain a sort of personal distance and have a kind of curatorial, editorial eye at all times, and not just be going, oh my God, when you read the latest. And that's what's wonderful about working at Welcome Collection is, not only is it arts and culture and conversations with artists and studio visits, but it's conversations with neuroscientists and the latest kind of research on the microbiome, and just like that kind of blowing your mind, where you suddenly realize that all these behaviors and patterns and the way in which your own emotions are shaped by things that you never realized, and that then these kind of quite, soul searching, quite difficult topics, some of it. So that's been a really interesting, difficult journey at moments. I don't know. Come back to me. I'll figure out how I would do it differently if I could start again. Right now we just opened them. I'm still in that, like, I'm really glad we got to this point. There was a lot of moments where we weren't sure whether we'd ever really be able to open these shows. So really, I'm on day 2 of like, oh, we opened it. That's great. I'll be more reflective in a few weeks, I think.
I was just thinking, I'm not sure I would change anything. I mean, I think that a show is so much a product of the journey that you go on at that particular moment. I mean, in 3 or 4 years, I'm a different person with different experiences. I would probably bring a different pair of eyes to a show like this, but I'm also very proud of what we've done. It does feel like it kind of captures something of all of our personalities, not just us as curators, but everybody that's worked on that project and the artists, and giving space to artists and the support that they need to make important work. But yeah, I think the next show I'm going to do is probably a bit smaller, a bit more agile. That's my only reflection.
I mean, I guess it's kind of related to this question. I mean, because when you do start, Laurie, from my understanding, being a colleague at the Welcome, when you start your research, we do have people who are part of our collections and research teams, right? Who you're able to say, this is the topic. And so in a way, I think as much as we think that you are the curators, you actually have quite a lot of input from many people, right? Because they know our collection, they're our collections experts. So they're kind of also responding to you all. Can you remember how many objects you initially started with? And this is always interesting because George also talked about the editing, right? When he came in, it's like there was an editing, but because I'm aware as a colleague that there is a process of how you come to know what is actually in our extensive collection, and also they know what exists outside our collection too. Could you share a little bit about that? Because I think it's a really really hear about.
Yeah, so that relationship with incredible colleagues in collections and research and library, really specialist librarians that we have here. So that kind of you set out at early stage thinking a kind of set of questions or provocations that we're kind of looking for. We're not quite sure, but we think we're interested in experiences of collective kind of manifestations of positive emotion and what have we got. So there's been various moments where just these exceptional kind of responses from really broad cross section of collection colleagues who kind of pulled together, like, I mean, really wonderful rabbit holes. I think that the massive challenge with happens because it is so subjective. Every single colleague obviously wonderfully comes with their interpretation, their version of how they'd respond. I mean, not naming any names, but there's a lot of stuff on alcohol that came forward from, and getting drunk, some incredible kind of Victorian prints of revelry in the streets. So I think there's it's been so fascinating, and that's true also in how we were kind of looking and shortlisting artists as well. I mean, there are a few artists who've definitely gone head on with tackling the subject of happiness, but it's not really a topic that because it's that many people have really attempted to kind of go head on with. So in a way, just sort of looking at kind of synergies of where people with past work have kind of explored emotion, or looking at the kind of evasiveness or shifting expressions or performance of feelings. So kind of looking at that kind of narrative in other people's work is kind of how we ended up with the shortlist that we did.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to ask another question from an audience member. Did you consider cancelling the exhibition because of the emerging pandemic and lockdown? Was that on the table at some point?
Definitely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, also just purely like lots of discussions about if we do it, when do we move it to? And that's, I'm sure, true for lots of institutions as well. But yeah, particularly with happiness, I think I had a kind of moment last summer where I sat down with our director Melanie Keane, or virtually sat down with our director Melanie Keane, and indeed the head of the kind of trust, Jeremy Farrar. I said, can we just sound everybody out? Are we good to open, or do we want to open with happiness? And in fact, actually, we didn't reopen our building straight away with happiness. We did a project around, as you mentioned, Teresa, being human. Looked at also the work of kind of carers in relation to how doctors are trained, the kind of medical patient perspective as well. We started with and sought to kind of find the summer to land this project. But yeah, it's definitely been lots of those kind of discussions. But now we're here. I'm very glad we're here.
It's this uncertainty that we've been curating into, and we were talking about this before, but you're always working a couple of years ahead, so you're always sort of trying to get a sense of where things are going, to make sure that the shows feel kind of urgent in terms of their current context. But this has been another level of uncertainty that changes from month to month. But yeah, it feels, talking to people, that people are ready for thinking about these ideas about hope, what gives them pleasure, what makes people happy. Feel like not necessarily repeating some of the traumas that people have gone through, but maybe offering something as something a bit different to think about, and to kind of process difficulty in a different way.
It's a very good one. Did you liaise with Charity Action for Happiness at all?
We actually went to a talk by Lord Layard, who's one of the founding members of that. So yeah, we're aware of that, the group, and have done some kind of research into that. But actually, and when I mentioned that we looked quite carefully, and in the last version of the shows had looked carefully at this idea of evaluation and measurement, and looking at where governments were bringing that in as a way to measure well-being of populations, which obviously is a big part of so once that kind of dropped out, that conversation has muted slightly, but it doesn't mean it's not an important one. And in fact, we've got really interesting, as mentioned, kind of early stuff around in our collections about Jeremy Bentham, who was kind of the original, if you want, kind of happiness, well-being data measurer. So we have some lovely historical reference points for that. If anybody wants more, come and see our collections or look online at collections.
Thank you for that. Someone's asking, did you find any challenges in approaching the curation with an intersectional lens?
Yeah, I think the show, intersectional is probably not the word I would use, but there's certainly the transdisciplinarity and trans-historical kind of approach to it, trying to draw relationships between kind of unique circumstances. I think that thinking about protest, and to return to some of that conversation about activism before, what I like about Amalia's work is that it holds space. It doesn't necessarily offer a kind of specific polemic, but offers a kind of space of that people can inhabit and bring to it their own kind of issues and concerns. But I think exhibitions and institutions are always, I think importantly, you're trying to intersect and to connect different forms of inequality and different issues together to see how they connect up, to think about how structures work, and structures of inequality that have, as a lot of people have been talking about, how it's been amplified by COVID. And I do see this moment as a form of reckoning that hopefully positive change will come out of in lots of different ways. So yeah, I'm not sure that answers the question. I don't know if Laurie, you want to come in on that one.
I mean, I would just in taking a slightly different tack, I think obviously Welcome Collection is in this unique position to bring kind of, where else do you get a Buddhist nun, a neuroscientist, an artist, all kind of coming together to look at subject in one space? And that's what's really, I think, important and perhaps distinct about how we approach our themes in our public programming. But for me, I think that's just, there's always a kind of, I personal experience of awe at this idea that some of this kind of contemporary research, let's say into the microbiome, has incredibly ancient roots. So we do have a kind of manuscript which by the Persian medical kind of philosopher Avicenna or Avicenna, who was kind of as early as the 11th century talking about the gut as a location for kind of treatment of emotional disorders, although as George written, the term emotion is not being used at that point. They're passions and different words, sentiments being used, but this idea that you would treat an imbalance in kind of mood with treatment for the digestive system. And so this idea that was there present in the 11th century, that in certain medical tradition, the European medical tradition, we completely forgot about for centuries until like maybe 3 years ago. That to me is fascinating and really inspiring when you can draw those correlations, past and present, but also from completely different disciplines speaking to each other.
I guess this is interesting around the intersectional lens, right? Because we can move beyond. I think intersectionality is defined in a specific way, really Crenshaw, etc. And we can talk about a sort of transdisciplinary conversations. But clearly, there's also the need within the museum sector to really think about whose voices get to get platformed. Just as you've mentioned now, this Persian doctor, it's amazing that we have access to this, that we know this, but oftentimes these voices are not heard and they're not platformed. So I personally sit with this thinking through how at the Welcome Collection, as staff and colleagues, we have a breadth of possibilities to research and to kind of restart rescripting the narrative and the histories told and who gets to tell them and which perspectives get platforms. I think the On Happiness program overall, and then the Joy and Tranquillity, I have to say, I remember arriving to the Welcome as inclusive practice lead, so that's my role, and speaking to you quite often, Laurie, about the show, and and me asking possibly difficult questions about why someone over someone else. So I think it's important for our audiences to also know that the Welcome are really trying to be as inclusive as possible to reduce barriers of who gets to be within our kind of programming and platform. And I say this because someone's just made kind of a question, also it's the last one I'm going to put. They were interested in the audio described tour today and have seen comments that the exhibition features lots of accessible resources, by no means common practice across the sector. Was this incorporated into the process of exhibition design from the start? And if you could give me 1 minute, because it's 1:08, and I will have to.
I could jump into it. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why when we talk about this kind of digital guide and the different voices, so there are about 12 objects across both shows that have been audio described, but not and I don't mean no disservice, but not in a straight audio descriptive way, in a quite a narrative way. So for us, it's really about integrating these kind of these storytelling tools in an inclusive way. So it has value to anyone that's listening to it. It adds something. It's integral. It's really important, and I think that is very much part of how we start thinking about shows from the get-go across all aspects of the font size, the kind of textured materials, the fact that our screens we have to always make sure that our screens have kind of solid bases. If someone's using a cane in the space, it's not going to be disorientating. It's really inbuilt, but I think hopefully it's not even particularly noticeable. It's a kind of it's there, but it's there for everybody.
Great. So with that, we're right bang on 2:00. So I quickly want to just wrap up now and say thank you to everyone. Thank you, George. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you for all the tech support and our public programming teams. and also to our moderators and all the producers. And thank you all so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and questions. Please stay connected with us. Welcome Collection and the Joy and Tranquillity exhibitions are now open. Book your tickets, watch it online, visit our website to book free tickets for your visit, and also please keep a lookout for our upcoming events, further exhibitions, and to explore collections online and digitally. So thank you, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Bye. Thanks, Joy.
Thank you.